see. It's wonderful. So welcome to the CoSA-NARA webinar. My name is Lisa Johnston. I'm the administrative coordinator for the Council of State Archivists, and I'm going to be your moderator today. So we'd like to get started by showing you what we're going to be doing. So I'm going to first ask Joy Banks, who is our executive director for CoSA, to give a brief welcome.
Thanks, Lisa, and welcome everyone. What a great group of people. I'm watching everybody say hello from all over the country. So thank you for joining us. CoSA and NARA have been doing joint webinars now for quite some time, and we're always glad to see this combination of perspectives between what's happening in the NARA offices at a federal level, and then getting perspectives from our states and territories that come out of CoSA. And I'm seeing so many of you from small archives, public libraries, and we had a feeling that the topic of microfilm would be of interest to a wide range of individuals, and we're glad to see that that is absolutely the case. So I know that Meg Phillips, who is also with NARA, was unable to join us today, but she sends her welcome and excitement for this continued partnership between our groups. So thank you to our speakers and Lisa for your work in moderating this conversation that we'll have today.
Thank you, Joy. So as you can see from our agenda, we're going to have a presentation from what's happening at NARA. And then we're going to have a discussion about the case to continue microfilming. And this is going to be from two of our state archives, Minnesota and Arkansas. There'll be a place for questions and answers at the end. So as you have questions as they come to you, go ahead and type them in chat, and we'll try and capture them and answer them for you at that time. And then we'll close up with some just some information about future programs and webinars. So let's go on. So our presenters today, we have four wonderful presenters. Our first presenter is Denise Henderson. She is the Director of Digitization for Research Services at the National Archives and Records Administration. In her role, Denise coordinates digitization efforts in research services to align with NARA's strategic goals and initiatives. These efforts include centralized mass digitization projects involving the systematic digitization of research service holdings, including textural, special media, and microfilm materials. From 2011 to 2018, Ms. Henderson worked in NARA's Office of Innovation in various roles, including as the chief of the Digital Public Access Branch. From 2007 to 2011, Ms. Henderson was a processing archivist in the Textual Services Division, where she successfully completed the Archivist Development Program in 2010 before attending the Archives Leadership Institute in 2011. She graduated from the University of Maryland with a Master's of Library Science with a focus on archives in December of 2006. Now, our state cohorts include Shawn Rounds. Shawn serves as the state archivist and director of library and archives at the Minnesota Historical Society. In these roles, she oversees not only the Minnesota State Archives, but also the processing, cataloging, and digitization of all of the Society's collections, the digital curation and preservation function, the microfilm program, online collections, access systems, and the operations of Gale Family Library. David Ware is the state archivist for the Arkansas State Archives, a post he has held since 2020. Prior to becoming the state archivist, he served as the state capitol historian. He holds a bachelor's degree in French literature from the University of Nebraska, a master in history from the University of Wyoming, and a doctorate in U.S. history from Arizona State University. And then Terra Titsworth is the archival manager for imaging and preservation at the Arkansas State Archives. She earned her bachelor's degree in history from the University of Arkansas at Little Rock before joining the archives in 2016. She previously worked for the Arkansas Commission of State Lands and Arkansas State Auditor for 10 years, So welcome to all of our presenters, and we'll turn this over now to Denise for a look at what's happening at NARA.
All right, thank you, Lisa. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I have a little bit of a weird setup here in my office, so I'm actually going to turn my video off while I do the presentation, if that's okay. So, very shame. I have multiple monitors and multiple cameras, and I can't tell what's going on half the time. So thank you, everybody. I'm very excited to be here today to join the discussion about microfilm. As noted in my bio, I lead the digitization operations in the Office of Research Services at NARA. My division is responsible for coordinating, managing, and executing large-scale digitization projects, including textual, photographic, and microfilm materials. Federal agencies, including NARA, have created a lot of microfilm and microfiche over the years. Between our accession microfilm and NARA created microfilm products, we have millions of rolls of film and sheets of fiche containing billions of pages in our holdings. Digitizing our microfilm holdings is a critical piece of NARA's strategic goal to make our holdings digitally available to more people across the globe. Before I tell you about our current activities and projects, I want to take a moment to talk about the development of NARA's in-house microfilm program and how the work of generations of NARA staff continue to drive our efforts today. Next slide, please. So NARA really was, probably many of you know, a pioneer in the field of microfilm and really started to create microfilm shortly after we were founded in the mid-1930s. As we can see in this photo from 1937, a NARA employee microfilming a bound volume. So by the 1940s, the microfilm program became what it really would be for the next almost 70 years. NARA created microfilm products, what we refer to today as microfilm publications, to preserve heavily used records, as well as valuable, fragile materials that could not be served in our research room. The availability of microfilm publications allowed NARA to connect our records to people who could not make it to the National Archives building in Washington by making the film available for purchase. And I really like looking at the fee structure from those early years, because a roll of microfilm was $5, some were $2, of course that's before inflation. So like everything, output started at a slow, steady pace. Gradually, by the end of 1943, NARA had digitized 400,000 pages of records. Next slide. So microfilming had fans in high places. The Honorary Society of American Archivists member and a noted archives advocate, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt wrote in a letter to retired first archivist R.D.W. Connors, in which he encouraged the use of modern processes like the microfilm to duplicate records. There was also at the time an added sense of urgency because it was wartime and destruction of our cultural institutions, and archive was a very real threat. I also appreciate that in this letter, President Roosevelt recognized the vast amount of work that this would involve, and he's certainly right about that, as I'm sure many of us would agree. So with Roosevelt's endorsement, the National Archives roll right along and microfilm hundreds and thousands of documents. By the mid-1960s, we have 67,000 rolls of microfilm that were created and available for purchase. Next slide. So what became known as a microfilm preservation program continued to grow over the decades. The program created thousands of microfilm publications that became part of our microfilm library, which now contains over 4,000 individual titles. The publications contain reproductions of NARA record series that cover a broad range of topics, including diplomacy and foreign relations, justice and law enforcement, land issues, military and intelligence matters, immigration, and on and on. So while NARA was also busy creating our own microfilm products, we were also accessioning microfilm from federal agencies. And the microfilm preservation program often created duplicates of this film to ensure continued preservation. Into the early 2000s, NARA staff worked on microfilm projects as seen in this photo. Next slide, please. So by the early 2010s, the program to create NARA microfilm products ended. This is actually an end slate used in many of our microfilm publications, familiar for a lot of us at NARA. Nothing really says end like the end slate, but also sort of accessing of equipment. Little tidbit. On the last slide, I showed the microfilm printer that is located at Archives 2 in College Park, Maryland, where I'm based. We actually still have that printer. But interestingly, I just had a conversation with my colleague in the Preservation and Conservation branch in St. Louis, and he was telling me that just last week they accessed their last microfilm camera and duplicator, which was just kind of a funny twist of timing in terms of doing this presentation this week. So basically, today we are not creating microfilm products at NARA, and really the end of that microfilm preservation program marked the beginning of a new chapter at NARA as we began to expand our focus on digitization and providing digital access to our holdings. And we have millions of microfilm rolls in our holdings, and really a lot of demand to access that microfilm. Next slide. So we really shifted from creating microfilm to digitize microfilm. And over the last decade or so, we've transitioned to a fully digital lab with microfilm and microfiche scanners. These pictures are actually a bit dated, so they don't show our current equipment capabilities, but we currently have 10 Meckel Mach Mini microfilm scanners and 3 Meckel Mach 7 microfiche scanners. Our film scanners are in use every day by our imaging technicians. Like the microfilm program before us, we had a slow and steady start over the last several years through the efforts of our in-house microfilm digitization team, as well as contract vendors. We have digitized thousands of rolls of film and are regularly adding newly digitized content to our National Archives catalog. The last couple of years, the pandemic proved to be a challenge, like so many of us. NARA's facilities were closed or limited in operation for quite some time. And so all of our digitization, practically all of our digitization operations were suspended. We were fortunate, however, to develop hybrid workflows for our microfilm scanning efforts that enabled our lab to continue production during facility closures. That production allowed us to make records accessible during a time when our research rooms, including our microfilm reading rooms, was closed to the public. Next slide. The systematic digitization of the microfilm library is one of our significant initiatives to support efforts to democratize access to our holdings and support overall reference activities. As I mentioned previously, the microfilm library contains over 4,000 microfilm publications, which kind of equates to about 260,000 or over 260,000 rolls of microfilm. Between NARA digitization efforts as well as partnership digitization projects over the years, over half of the microfilm library has already been digitized and is available digitally. And we anticipate completing this project over the next 3 to 5 years. When I was looking for images for this presentation, I found this photo on the left in our catalog, and this was taken in 1955. So I was interested in the microfilm publication and the rolls sitting on the shelf there, and wondering if we had digitized it yet, but had gone through our queue. So I zoomed in, and the middle picture is the zoomed in, and the top box is roll number 4 from microfilm publication 70, which is dispatches from the US consuls to Buenos Aires from record group 59, which is our State Department record group and is one of our most heavily used record groups. So I checked the National Archives catalog, and in fact, all 25 rolls of M70, including roll 4, as seen here, are now digitally available in our catalog and accessible to anyone, anywhere, without having to visit a NARA facility to access the film or pay to purchase the roll. I thought this photo was a neat find and really ties the history of NARA's microfilm program with our present day activities. While we focus a lot on our microfilm publications, we are also at the same time scanning accession microfilm holdings. Chief among those projects are the scanning of our decennial population censuses. In April of 2022, NARA released the 1950 census, which was the end result of a 10-year project to digitize over 6,300 rolls of 35mm film. Scanning actually started on that project right after the release of the 1940 census in 2012. We had a 2-person team work on that, and we completed scanning in early 2022. A little later than anticipated due to the pandemic, but we got it done. We took a breather for a couple of months, but we quickly transitioned to start work on digitizing the 1960 census, which will be released in 2032. To give you an idea of scale, to contrast to the 1950 census, which was a little over 6,300 rolls, the 1960 census forms are contained on 41,850 rolls. So there's a lot of scanning work ahead of us, and the clock is already ticking. And I know the next 9 years are going to fly by. Next slide. So that brings us to kind of the challenges. So some of the issues that we're dealing with in terms of the 1960 census are similar to other microfilm collections in our holdings. We have a lot of microfilm and acetate, a lot of acetate microfilm. While we certainly keep it in cold storage, it is deteriorating and is obviously a preservation risk. We have a lot of film on metal reels that need to be put on plastic reels so that they can work on our scanners. So as we're planning our scanning projects, we're factoring in how to ensure that we're safely handling microfilm, especially those rolls that are in a fragile state, creating images to capture all the data and meet recommended digital imaging specifications. While we may not be creating or duplicating microfilm any longer, we actually still need the microfilm supplies, tools, and equipment so we can make repairs or splices, add leader or trailer, and so on in advance of scanning. And I saw in chat that it seems like that's a concern of a lot of people. We find that it's sometimes hard to find some of those tools or equipment that we need on the market. And once we find it, we tend to hang on to it because we're not sure if it'll be available in the future. We have had some luck recently in using some refurbished equipment. One kind of example, we currently have 3 rewinder stations, which you would think would be sufficient, but that over 41,000 rolls of the census, 1960 census, we discovered that they're actually all on the rolls backwards. So we can't actually scan anything. So that was a really fun discovery for us. So each roll now needs to be physically unwound and rewound correctly. So as we're doing that, we're taking time to inspect the film and add leader and trailer. But as you can imagine, it will take a significant amount of time, especially just with our 3 rewinders. Another challenge that we've been faced with has really been loss of institutional knowledge. Over the years, due to staff departures, there's been a loss of knowledge about microfilm processes that can really help inform digitization efforts. I was actually a little nervous about accepting this invitation. I was telling Lisa, I don't actually know the history of the microfilm program at NARA as well, just because we've lost so many folks that worked on microfilm creation in the past. So I'm well known for picking my colleagues' brains about all matter of microfilm and microfilm history questions. Also, we contend with issues involving quality of images from digitized microfilm publications, as well as our accession film, varies across the film and really depends on the quality of the original filming. And our imaging technicians make necessary adjustments to render the best image possible before we put it online. We realize that those adjustments don't always improve the image. And we know that some of the images are not as good as if we digitize the original record. However, we believe that making the microfilm digitally available provides greater access to more people. We really assess our projects with a critical eye, and we're always refining the process to deliver a better product. And we're learning from our digitization efforts and intend to use the results of our microfilm digitization to inform and target future efforts to potentially digitize from the original records. So there are challenges specific to the physical microfilm, but digitization also presents new challenges, including a significant increase in the data volume of our digital content, transferring that data between systems, storage, long-term preservation, and access issues. We're working through these types of issues every day while we continue to increase digitization efforts. We deal with a vast amount of records at NARA, And sometimes it can feel daunting to think about digitizing a complete collection, but especially in terms of the microfilm, we've really received positive feedback from our researchers who appreciate and have benefited from the efforts. And that makes the work worthwhile. Next slide. So thank you. That's all for my presentation. I appreciate you having me today, and we'll wait for questions during the Q&A.
Thank you, Denise. We appreciate you sharing what's going on at NARA regarding your digitization. And you brought up some great points about what some of your concerns are. And I bet when we get to the question and answer part, we can have an interesting discussion among everyone about how we deal with some of these things. So now we'd like to hear from some of our state archives and their viewpoints on microfilming. And we're going to start with Shawn Rounds in Minnesota.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm really pleased to be here today to talk about this topic because I am a longtime fan of microfilm. I'm going to keep my remarks pretty short so that we can hear from everyone and have questions or time for questions and discussions here at the end. So the Minnesota Historical Society's microfilming preservation program was started in 1948. And through 1948 to about 1961, we'll call that its infancy period, where we had a lot of growing pains and kind of finding its feet in terms of space and cameras and processes and even film quality. So some of our film from that era is, I don't want to say dubious, but it is perhaps not as rigorously checked as later film. In 1961, a new microfilm lab manager instituted some much needed changes, including some really thorough quality control standards. By the 1970s, newspapers were being routinely microfilmed as they came in, along with some selected high volume government record series like tax lists, which can take up a lot of volume. So we were microfilming those not only for preservation, but frankly to reduce the amount of shelf space that these collections were taking. So in 1978, this whole batch of microfilming work, this whole microfilming program was supplemented by a really intensive effort to digitize our bound newspaper volume collection, some of which were badly deteriorated, but we wanted to, again, it was the case of preservation, you know, because newsprint goes bad so fast, as well as saving space. So we had a pretty rigorous and well-regarded microfilm program for many, many decades. However, in 2009, all of this came to an end when the microfilm program was shut down in anticipation of a digital revolution, as well as what was basically some cost-saving measures. Well, the revolution never came. Publishers kept sending us hard copy papers. In Minnesota, by statutes, papers of records are required to deposit with us copies. So today we get almost 450,000 newspaper pages each year. So when that program was closed in 2009, starting then, we started accumulating millions of newspaper pages. They just started piling up as we waited in vain for those publishers to get on the digital bus. Finally, it became obvious that that wasn't going to happen, at least not in a timely fashion for us. And so we realized that we would have to start digitizing this enormous backlog. And these papers we were storing them everywhere in our facility and some offsite facilities. We were shrink wrapping them. We were putting them in boxes. It became a burden that we're still dealing with. So we turned to digitization, not only to deal with that backlog, but also for our incoming acquisitions, because we're still accumulating, of course, at a rate of almost 500,000 pages a year. So digital, as you know, is great for access, which is one of our big goals. And in fact, it's our whole mission is preservation for access. But digital is also expensive and burdensome when it comes to permanent preservation, because those millions of newspaper pages quickly turn into many, many, many terabytes of data, which then have to be managed. And that happens pretty quickly. So in 2015, we decided to go back to microfilm for our preservation copy of our newspapers. We used a special state money from Constitutional Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund sales tax. We get a portion of that comes to the Minnesota Historical Society. And so we were able to use that money as well as a one-time legislative appropriation to, among other things, start a new microfilm program, which is centered around comms. So we're creating microfilm from digital files. And in 2020, you'll notice there's a gap here of 2015 to 2020. There's a substantial gap there as we were doing planning. We were looking at options. In 2020, we purchased an SMA 35 archive writer, as well as a Stout Piccolo 35 processor, and we got to work doing this in-house. So back in 2009, when the microfilm program was shuttered, we had over 130,000 reels of microfilm in our collection, of which there was about 85,000 reels of newspapers. We're adding to that now at a pretty good clip. Currently, what we do is we digitize hard copy papers using a color duplex WideTech 36DS scanner. And we are digitizing not only that backlog that I talked about, but also our incoming papers. We have our entire workflow process has now shifted so that as newspapers come in, they're checked in, they're logged, they're cataloged, they're going through this digitization process. We then process those image files into access copies for index into our online newspaper hub, which I think, gosh, I can't remember. It was only a few months ago. We crested 500,000 pages of newspapers in that hub, and then we send the master TIFFs into our COM process. I will tell you here that our technology infrastructure at MHS is not dedicated to our process. I wish it was, but we share IT with the entire institution. So while we do have good server space to handle this whole process, we also use SneakerNet, and we write off the TIFF files to hard drives, and we take them over to the COM room and where they are processed. So to give you some sense of our production, since last July, we've created over 1,200 negative reels in-house on our archive writer. And we've processed over 550 of those on our Piccolo processor. Now, here's where I need to acknowledge that some of our challenges have been with the equipment. In particular, the Piccolo processor has been a challenge for us in terms of getting it to run and getting it to run consistently, which is not to badmouth the technology, and certainly not our vendor who we've become very, very well acquainted with. But that's something to just note, that I think with any sort of equipment like this, because there's not that many people using it, perhaps, we face some challenges, and we haven't found our community group yet to help problem solve with it. We, of course, also have been having some challenges getting film supplies, especially with Eastman Park Micrographics exiting the market. But we were able to acquire some. So we are continuing on this path. We're looking at reconfiguring our on-site microfilm vault storage vault for greater capacity, as well as evaluating our offsite vendor storage arrangements. So we continue to be committed to this. And then just to kind of close the loop on it all, and thinking about what we just heard from Denise, we also have all that old microfilm in our collection, and we're not abandoning that, or we're not going to continue to be keeping up with our Gideon readers and stuff in our research room forever. We have a Mechelmach 12 microfilm scanner that we use to digitize the film, and we digitize that for projects as well as researcher requests. We do have some microfiche in our collection, which we haven't yet started to digitize, but we have some equipment to do that. We have some Scan Pros that we've been putting into our library so that when people come, they can self-serve on those machines to get the digital copies that they want. And all in all, it feels like this has really been coming together. So I'm going to turn it over now to David, and thank you very much for your time.
I guess, Tara, we're up to bat.
All right.
Okay. We feel in some ways like kind of the country cousins here, because we here are we are, I think, the last conventional microfilm operation in the state of Arkansas. Sounds like it's getting to be that way in the entire country at this rate. Our microfilm program began in 1957. We're not the first state agency to be using microfilm. As far as I know, the first microfilming of materials started in the Secretary of State's office, to which we are not connected, except by their having dumped lots of material on us over the decades. They started just after World War II, microfilming records at a very tentative rate and with indifferent results, to put it delicately. I say this because we inherited their microfilm at some point, and it's pretty murky stuff, all things considered. But it got better. It got better. At any rate, our filming program began in 1957 primarily to address the buildup of bound and boxed volumes of Arkansas's early newspapers, for which there was very little storage space available at our previous facilities. The first director of what was then called the Arkansas History Commission had begun the quest for finding early Arkansas journalism. His successors continued in that line. During the 50s and 60s, relationships were established with publishers of newspapers throughout the state. So even though there's nothing in state law that requires papers of record to send copies to the state archives, there was, on the other hand, a tradition of doing this. And so we had ongoing friendly relationships with many, in fact, just about all Arkansas newspaper publishers for many years. Of course, what's happened in recent years?
It's become increasingly hard to get people to send us stuff for free.
Yeah, because you have, in many cases, papers being subject of consolidation or something going out of business. The new proprietors will be trying to get rid of the comp subscriptions in order to save a few dollars here and there. They're in many cases out of state. And so they don't have a whole lot of interest in dealing with the state archives to continue the permanent and durable copies making of their respective publications. Now, compared to National Archives or to Minnesota, our collection is pretty small potatoes. What do we have, Tara?
We have about 23,000 rolls of master negatives that we filmed here, and probably over 16,000 rolls of county records, court records, and vendor film that we purchased for the research room.
Yeah, and most of that is 35 millimeter?
Yes, most of it is. We do have some 16 millimeter, but most of it's 35.
Right. We have some prize rolls of 16 millimeter from the Secretary of State's office. They're so stiff you can't unroll them without breaking them. They contain the only surviving copies of early correspondence of the governor's office. We're waiting to see how we can retrieve that information. But at any rate, we have a sizable collection. We have the largest existing collection of Arkansas journalism, and nobody so far has challenged us on that. We keep the master negatives in a refrigerated vault, which one of my predecessors also used for taking afternoon naps on the advice of his doctor. His lounger has disappeared. How do we do microfilm? We do it the old-fashioned way. If you notice here, exhibit number 1, a conventional Recordac camera head for planetary camera setup. The first time I worked with microfilm was back in the 1970s. I used a camera just like that. I was shocked when I came on board here to find we still using these things. They do wear out over time. That's one of our challenges to keep our vintage cameras going. We have several cannibalized hulks that we use for donor parts and that sort of thing. And Tara and her staff are good at making things work. Troubleshooting, because finding someone to actually troubleshoot this old equipment is getting harder and harder. Denise talked about the loss of knowledge. That applies to service personnel as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. As far as processing, Tara?
processing the film. We do
Yes.
still process all of our own film here. We shoot all of our own film here. We still get 98 publications in the mail that we shoot hard copies for. But yeah, we still use original, these Kodak planetary stands with MRD2 cameras. They are impossible to have fixed or repaired. Luckily, I have somebody on staff who really doesn't mind taking things apart. He's not afraid of it. So
And he puts them back together.
he does. He puts them back together, and 9 times out of 10 they work.
Yeah.
But we do still process all of our own film. It comes in. We shoot things on 100-foot rolls. We do average about 243 a year of produced rolls of film, and we still sell around 150 rolls to libraries and university, duplicate copies of those. Like David said, we have had what's been passed down as a gentleman's agreement with publications, giving us complimentary subscriptions, and it's just no longer working. So we have allocated funds to try to pay for subscriptions as to not lose them.
No. Now, when I came on board 3 years ago, I knew there was a conventional microfilm operation. I didn't realize, though, that so much old equipment, so much old technology was still in place. We still do it the old way. But facing equipment death in the not too distant future, we're looking at other options. And when I came on board, one of my colleagues here told me about this strange device called an archive writer. And I looked at her and said, "You're kidding. Microfilm out of digital files." And she assured me there really were such things. It sounded Rube Goldberg to me. Well, last year we took delivery of a Zeuschel archive writer paid for with a special Arkansas Natural and Cultural Resources Council grant specifically for that purpose. Because we understand that the future of capture is going to be increasingly digital. We can keep these old hulks going as long as we want. If you pay bongo bucks, you can buy a new Zeuschel microfilm camera, or you can take advantage of the capture opportunities and the image enhancement opportunities that are possible using digital capture. And so we have a Zeuschel 14,000 large format scanner. We've also recently, in fact, as of yesterday, put together a kind of a home-built mirrorless SLR on a tall copy stand tethered arrangement to try to see if we can do this in our house. We're looking at book scanners. We're looking at other scanners so that we can actually take care of some of the backlog we have and convert these things to digital files so that we can, in fact, run them through the archive writer, because just about as everybody else has to deal with, digital storage is uncertain. It's difficult. We, like Shawn, deal with an IT division that serves our entire parent department, not just us. Their priorities and ours do not always strictly align. Their language and ours seem to be sometimes originating on different continents, run through a tin can modem. We're getting better, though. But we have very limited server space. We have access to cloud storage space, but it's run through essentially another state agency that serves as a vendor, which adds a considerable tick up to the price for even cold storage. And we are discouraged from using external hard drives for security reasons, as well as the likelihood of error, corruption of files showing up over time. So for us, microfilm remains the viable, the desirable preservation medium for the permanent, durable copies. Digital is great for access. We are in our third cycle of the National Digital Newspaper Program, getting increasing numbers of our publications up and available through the Library of Congress. We do not as yet have a platform that would facilitate putting up additional material, although that's something that we too are working on, all the while trying to keep our current equipment going. Tara, what do we need to add to this?
You pretty much covered it all.
Yeah. The problem is that for making something last, apart from writing on plates of gold or on really good paper, there's nothing that's as good as microfilm. And we are about preservation of the information here and making it as available as possible. Although we found that fewer and fewer people come to our research room to try to argue the U-scans into working. And so we have to figure out some way to get it out to the audience that has largely disappeared and has not yet showed up again in connection with the pandemic. It's a challenge, but we're optimistic. So, anything? Okay, should we give the microphone back to our peers and betters?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you very much, David and Tara. So your different perspective, but all very much some common themes as we go along. And I will tell you that we have lots of people interested in asking questions.
Oh, Lord.
So that's all right. You don't necessarily have to have the answers, but so let's go to the questions now. And I'm going to try something. Let's see. Ashley, does your microphone work? I'm not sure if I've got a thing that says I might be able to allow you to talk, but I thought I clicked it. I don't know if we can. Okay, maybe not. Oh, I see a hand raised. Let's see whose hand is raised here. All right. Jay Yost, I'm going to ask you to unmute and see if you can talk. No, maybe not. Okay. All right, so we'll do this the old-fashioned way. We'll just start down the list and I'll give you the questions and then we'll see what they have to say. So this is from Ashley. She's with the sheriff's office. And she said, usually they send their records to the recorder's office to be microfilmed, but they're considering purchasing their own equipment and doing it in-house. But their concern is that microfilm appears to be outdated and they don't want to purchase obsolete equipment. So what would your thoughts be, Denise, Shawn, David, and Tara?
We've got some fine vintage Kodak equipment we can sell you.
That's right.
Bargain price. Oh, the thing is that there are microfilm cameras available for sale. Now, 16 millimeter, and I think Zoichel even offers 35 millimeter. Am I right? Pricey, but it's out there. And if you're looking for a storage medium, microfilm is not obsolete, not yet. But boy, it's a hard road to get to be able to make it yourself.
I would agree. I mean, microfilm it has a lot of benefits to it. As a storage medium, it's stable, it's easily stored, it's all of those things, human readable. But the creation of it can be a challenge. But as David said, there is equipment out there should you wish to pursue it. A film now with supplies could be a challenge and maybe getting more expensive as more vendors leave the market.
Sure.
Yeah, I remember in the 70s, Nebraska used Fujifilm in processing because the quality was consistent and it was a lot cheaper than buying Kodak. Now it looks like unless we can get Agfa film, they're the last suppliers standing, and not cheap.
Okay, thank you for that answer. So basically, Ashley, the answer is it's not really obsolete, but what's happening is the companies that produce the equipment and the materials are slowly disappearing. So You know, that's going to be the challenge. John Dugan, I'm going to see if we can get you to talk. So let's and see if we can unmute you.
Can you hear me?
Oh, we can. All right. You can go ahead and ask your questions.
Well, let me make a comment first, and this has been in the chat too on the previous question. And I think another person said that most sheriff records are only a 5 to 10 year record. So they were recommending them not be microfilmed. And I sort of said something similar to that in the chat as well. But my questions were actually more for the NARA presenter. And those are, what are the advantages of working with or not working with Family Search and Ancestry? So these free, air quote, free project partners. And I think somebody else asked about newspapers.com in the other context. So maybe David and Shawn can comment on that.
Sure. So this is Denise. If I can start. What are the advantages of digitizing in-house versus our partnerships with Ancestry or Family Search? So I will say that Ancestry and Family Search, both via purchasing and through formalized partnership agreements with NARA, they did digitize about 12% of our microfilm library. They were obviously primarily interested in records that had genealogical interest. And our library really has a lot more than that. So for us, digitizing in-house, we were able to start really focusing on those collections that weren't of interest to the Ancestry or Family Search companies. With Ancestry, at least the agreement with NARA, there was an embargo on that before we could get access to the images. So for us, when we scan in-house, it's just, we can make things available much more quickly on our own website. So we've had a very successful partnership relationship with them, with both Ancestry and Family Search over the years, digitizing microfilm as well as textual materials.
This is Shawn. I'll just jump in to say, that I agree with Denise on what she said about the embargoes. That's a big kind of deal breaker for us that we've discovered over the years as we've watched some opportunities to use our own materials slip past. But I could see that there could be benefits. Now, we've had some very successful partnerships with Family Search. And in fact, what I didn't mention is during those years from 1948 through the 70s, when or actually up until 2009, when our microfilm program was very active, we had a really profitable, I shouldn't say profitable, productive partnership with Family Search when it was the Genealogical Society of Utah on microfilming projects. So that has been a partnership that has lasted now into the digital era as well for us.
We've had an ongoing relationship with Ancestry.com. Unfortunately, it's been around so long, we can't even find the initial contract for it. But the arrangement was that we would be able to give patrons access to Ancestry.com materials in our research rooms in return for their being allowed to microfilm and then digitize records of ours. That was initiated years in the past. As I say, we can't even find the contract now. We hope to continue this, but a complication has arisen. Ancestry.com sent us a copy of the current contract. We showed it to our department's counsel, and he pointed out several instances where it runs against the state sovereignty provisions in our code in terms of purchasing and dealing with vendors and that sort of thing. Happily enough, Ancestry's legal staff have expressed their willingness to modify their agreements to make them not run afoul of language in our state code, which shows in earnest on their part. So we're working it out because we would like this to continue. We don't want to simply have everybody have to come to us either online or in person to see our records. We want this material to be available. They provide a platform. They get it out to people where it can be used and can be found. So it's all good for us if we can get it past the lawyers.
Okay, thank you, David. The next question comes from Allison Smith. Let's see if Allison, if you got a microphone, are you able to talk? She may not have a microphone, so. All right, her question was for Shawn. She says, do you plan on participating with newspapers.com to allow for access once they are digitized?
No, we aren't going to partner with newspapers.com, at least not right now or in the immediate future. We've looked at newspapers.com a number of times, but you know, we have our own newspaper hub that we use, and we have a system in place so that copyrighted newspapers are firewalled to within our research library, while other newspapers are more freely available. We do have a digital use agreement with many publishers that we try for each time we put a new paper in, which releases the copyright concerns for us so that we can make them widely available. So we've got some processes in place. So we feel like right now newspapers.com would not be adding to our value for our researchers.
Okay, thank you, Shawn. Ronnie Calder, let's see if we can get you unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
I guess, Shawn, you had mentioned that you have scan pros for when your researchers come in. A lot of our day-to-day is, you know, we have appointments and researchers come in and use microfilm. Currently, we have microfilm readers that are hooked up to printers, and then they can just print their copies, and we charge them 50 cents for the copies. But when you use the Scan Pro, one, do you charge them for anything? And then two, how is that going? Because we'd like to update our machines and everything. We have a Scan Pro for staff in the back, but we're wondering what kind of machines to put out for the public.
You know, the Scan Pros, we have found them to be really good for researchers. You know, we put together a workstation of the Scan Pro, a standalone workstation that's not hooked to our network, a printer, and then a large size monitor that can go portrait. And these are some workstations that we've replicated, I think, 5 or 6 times in our library. They're very popular.
Okay.
Our biggest problem is having people sign up for small periods of time on them rather than trying to just sit on them and do all their research. We don't charge anything for the use of those other than if they want to print off, we charge them nominal fee for the printing if they do that.
Yeah. Do you have other machines besides the Scan Pros?
We do. We have a variety of other machines, including Gideon readers, and kind of we've had microfilm for so long. We sort of have the life cycle of microfilm reader in our library. And it was only recently that I had to chastise my my circulation manager for putting away the old machines just in case he needed parts, the broken ones. So I'm like, well, we'll let them go in that case. So we're phasing them out as we can.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ronnie. Mary Johnson, let's see if you can unmute yourself and talk. Okay. Mary asked made a couple comments. She said that at the West Virginia archives, they continue to microfilm in-state newspapers with an older camera. She said at present, the microfilm is far more cost-effective than digital storage would be, and we are struggling with digital storage for their other needs. So that she likes seeing that. Now, also, she had an additional comment. Let's see if I can find that one here real quick. For those who are doing digital, are there any online presentation issues with newspapers that hold copyright on their publications? That's a good one for everybody. Are you having any issues with copyright for these online things?
This is Shawn. I'll just start by saying, yes, we always have to be aware of copyright. And we are part of the NDNP project, and we have a rigorous process for determining whether something is still in copyright or not, up through whatever it is in the 60s. And so we apply that to newspapers. And as I mentioned, we also talk to newspaper publishers on a regular basis to get their signed agreement that we can put their papers out. If we don't have a signed agreement, or if something is still in copyright, it's firewalled into our library.
Okay. Thank you. Tyler Stump, can you unmute? Okay. All right. This is for Arkansas. David, you had mentioned that some of your microfilm that was created in the 1950s is degraded to the point where you can no longer access it. Are you concerned that the microfilm you're creating now will also only last a few decades? That sounds like a pretty serious issue, which would impact long-term preservation of these records.
Oh, yes. Well, the truly awful microfilm was the stuff that we inherited from the Secretary of State's office. I'm not sure what they souped it with, but I don't think they washed it. No archival processing back in the basement of the Capitol back then. I think that's probably safe to assume.
Right.
We do have problems with film that we've shot from the 50s and 60s and even to the 70s with Vinegar Syndrome. It's safety film. And we were at one of our branch facilities last year, opened up a drawer of their microfilm holdings, and poof, wishbone Italian came out of that drawer, but not the good kind. And what we're dealing with is deciding which of the films to restrike from the negatives, which are generally in pretty good condition because they've been kept in refrigerated storage in our vault. Which of the films to reprint, which to in fact replace using now available digital databases rather than simply replacing. This is especially with old National Archives film and so forth that we bought decades ago that apparently also wasn't perhaps washed and fixed as well as it might have been. It's safety film. Our modern film, our polyester-based film, Terra is as hard-nosed as anyone I've ever met about properly fixing, about properly washing the film, and then we store it well. And so we're confident that the film that we've shot over the last decade or so is pretty good, but we basically go and sniff in the cabinets and monitor where Vinegar Syndrome is starting to crop up, and then basically on a drawer by drawer basis, we make determinations what we have to do.
And I test with AD strips regularly.
Yes. Much more sensitive than my nose.
Okay, thank you. Denise, John has another question from John Dugan. What are the strategies for NARA to do original capture of historic records? For example, the thousands of cubic feet of Civil War quartermaster claims and the hundreds of cubic feet of predecessor of the Freedmen Bureau.
So the strategy is essentially to digitize that. We're all in on digitization. Now, those particular records, and a lot of the records at our facility at Archives One in Washington, D.C. were older records, so they do require conservation treatment, and we would have to treat those records, make them safe for handling at our cameras. And those two particular series are always on the short list of things that people want. They're not prioritized right now, but I can see in a few years work, eventually getting to those to digitize them. But the strategy is digitization.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got several questions, and I'm sorry, we probably won't get to all of them today. Here's a question from John Warren. Have you run into Redox? And we'll toss that out to everybody. No?
Redox?
I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. So John, let's see if we can get you to unmute here. To get to you here.
While you're trying to unmute John Warren,
Okay.
John Dugan, we've run into that a lot. It's the same problem. It's the original processing was not done well. They didn't have the good chemical mix, and it's little red dots on the film, basically.
And John, yeah, that's what basically John answered in chat.
Oh, yeah, yeah. We haven't run into that so much with our film at the Historical Society. It's been, if anything, Vinegar Syndrome. We have splices, the bad slices that are, coming apart and stuff like that. That's been a bigger problem for us too, as we start to digitize, because we have to make sure the film is in good shape.
And I figured out how to unmute.
Yes, there you go.
And yes, we found a little bit of redox on some of our microfilm rolls that we got upstairs here. It was very little, and on the same roll of film, it does feel kind of like rubbery, but yeah, those little red dots on there are eating away at the words. Not many rolls, very, very few rolls that I've seen that on, maybe one out of about 500 or 600 in that particular set of microfilm. But it is a concern, and it was a little bit harder to duplicate that roll using the silver duplicator that we use. So it was very interesting to run into that. So I was just wondering if that was quite normal or unnormal. And I don't know how to mute. Oh, there it is.
I don't know that we have any answers to that. So
We haven't seen it yet. We have something else to look for.
Yes, I have not run into anything like that, but primarily we struggle like Shawn from Vinegar Syndrome, or somebody that got really splice happy in the past and they're just breaking apart.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I noticed a lot of the old microfilm rolls, they would microfilm the day as it came in, and then they would put those rolls aside. So we end up with images, black spot, images, black spot, images, black spot. And that's on some of the other ones that were actually filming day for day instead of waiting for entire week or entire month, depending on what newspaper.
Big operation.
Yeah.
So for those of you having that problem, Errol Somay at the Library of Virginia said that he has experience with both vinegar and redox. And so there's a resource at the Library of Virginia if somebody needs to reach out if you're running into these issues. So thank you for that. Yes.
One thing that I'd like to credit, I'd like to credit to the National Digital Newspaper Project. It's given us occasion to go back and do critical inspection of a lot of our runs of, especially of our older newspapers. You know, in a relatively small agency like ours, there's never enough time to prioritize going back and sort of seeing how you're doing in there and so forth. Selecting materials that are suitable for digitization for the NDNP has occasioned a lot of basically ground truthing in our vault. Tara and her crew going in, actually, do we actually have this? What condition is it in? So the NDNP, quite apart from it giving access to the material on those films, it's given us an occasion to go in and basically get a much more up-to-date idea of our condition of problems that are developing than we would have had if we simply kept filming and trying to keep up with the papers.
It's given us a reason to evaluate our holdings and, identify problems before they get too bad, or realize film that's just and was filmed and is in really poor condition.
Right.
That's what we found the most of.
So props to the NDNP.
Yes. Thank you all. And we're coming to the close of our webinar hour here. We're actually a little bit over, but that's okay. But there were such great questions that we wanted to try to get as many of them in as possible. Do feel free to reach out to the presenters if you have a particular question and that we didn't get to. So let's go ahead and close things out. Becky, with the next slide. So if you enjoyed today's webinar, I hope you check back with us for some additional webinars in the future. Our member webinars, here's some of the upcoming topics. And we've got a two-parter coming on building and remodeling. So we're going to be excited about that. In addition to member webinars, we of course have our SERI webinars, and they don't have their current schedule posted, but again, go to the CoSA website and you can certainly see all of that. All of our webinars are recorded and are then posted on our CoSA YouTube channel. So if you missed it or you had to leave or you want to listen to it again, that will be available for you as well. Next slide. And next slide. So it's easy to get a hold of CoSA. Just reach out lots of different ways. And next slide. We'd like to thank our sponsors and funders, and of course, always the National Archives for their participation in this. Next slide. And we thank you for joining us today. Thank you, David, Tara, Shawn, Denise, for a wonderful presentation. Did we solve any problems? I don't know, but it shows that perhaps we have a community that we need to keep this conversation going. Some good points, and I thank you all for joining us today, and we will see you at the next webinar. Have a great rest of your week. Shawn, dig out from the snow, stay warm. Everyone else, take care, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you.